A Moscow court has sentenced 4 journalists to prison over alleged ties to former opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
NATO's Rutte and Ukrainian President Zelensky pay a surprise visit to a military hospital in Odessa.
Former Peruvian President Ollanta Humala and his wife have been sentenced to 15 years in prison for money laundering.
4 journalists have been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison each by a Moscow court for alleged involvement in activities linked to late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. They have been accused of being part of Navalny's foundation, designated as extremist in 2021. Lawyers representing the journalists have denounced the verdict as illegal and unfair.
Мы однозначно будем все подавать жалобы, тут вообще никаких разговоров нет, потому что сама по себе профессия журналиста это не является экстремизмом, а уж исходя из тех материалов дела, которые есть, ну я скажу так, что доказательств того, что ребята совершили какие-то, не то что преступления, а вообще проступки, на наш взгляд не представлено.
The trial was held behind closed doors, justified by authorities citing provocation risks from Navalny supporters. Their pre-trial detention was repeatedly extended, keeping all 4 journalists under arrest until June 2025. The closed trial is part of a wider crackdown on dissent that has grown after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have paid a surprise visit to a military hospital in Odessa. They met with wounded Ukrainian soldiers and medical personnel, acknowledging their service and sacrifice. Rutte praised Ukraine's democratic values and Zelensky's human-centered efforts.
You are spending your time, your days, your weeks, your years on this, and we have seen it. It's so important, and this is the difference between Ukraine and Russia. This is the difference between a dictatorship and a democracy.
During a meeting with Rutte, Zelensky confirmed ongoing talks in Turkey on security in the Black Sea as part of the coalition of the willing. These talks are military-focused and not peace negotiations with Russia, which continues to reject the US proposed unconditional ceasefire.
Talks between the US and Russia on a ceasefire in Ukraine have continued over the last 2 months at a time when Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities have intensified. The US says it is pushing for an immediate solution. However, Washington's initiative is starting to look hollow. Some analysts at the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece believe.
It's not filled with principles, as in upholding the principle of sovereignty, upholding the principle of people to be able to decide their own government. It is upholding the principle of trying to end wars, and that is not a bad one in itself, because bloodshed does breed bitterness and makes it harder to solve. But all in all, it has been confusing and without clear principles.
Given the American consensus on strategic preeminence in the Indo-Pacific and the relationship with China, analysts say Ukraine's fate cannot leave whoever is in power in Washington indifferent. This is because if Russia wins, the strategic challenge posed by China becomes even greater.
For sure, he needs a success also in geopolitics. After Afghanistan, after Kabul, after some other shortages, I would say, America cannot just lose Ukraine, cannot just sell Ukraine to Russia. And also, I think Americans are more and more aware that the alliance between Russia and China is strong, that Russia won't change sides. It's a science fiction scenario.
Although the battlefield reality for Ukraine remains difficult, Russia has had very little to show compared to the price it has paid.
Το Κίεβο υποστηρίζει ότι μόνο ο Πούτιν επωφελείται από τη συνέχιση του πολέμου, τονίζοντας παράλληλα ότι η σύγκρουση έχει πλέον παγκόσμια διάσταση, δηλαδή δεν αφορά μόνο την Ουκρανία, αλλά την Ευρώπη, τις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες και την ίδια τη διεθνή τάξη. Από τους Δελφούς για το Euronews, Faye Vulgeri.
On the second anniversary of the outbreak of Sudan's civil war, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy has announced €140 million in new aid during an international conference on Tuesday in London. Lammy stressed that the biggest obstacle is not funding but political will.
And today I'm announcing a further £120 million worth of support. But the biggest obstacle is not a lack of funding or texts at the United Nations. It's a lack of political will.
The conference aims to mobilise UK and EU humanitarian aid for Sudan, with neither the Sudanese government nor its paramilitary rival Rapid Support Forces invited. Meanwhile, Germany said it was pledging an additional $125 million for Sudan and the neighbouring states. Tens of thousands of people have been killed by the conflict. According to the UN, over 12.6 million people have been forcibly displaced and some 25 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance and protection.
Uncertainty surrounds the venue for the next crucial round of nuclear talks between the US and Iran. On Tuesday, Iran's foreign ministry insisted the negotiations will return to Oman, where initial talks were held last weekend. This directly contradicts announcement made just a day earlier by Italy and the Netherlands, with both saying talks were set to take place in Rome this Saturday. On its part, the US has yet to confirm a location. Hosting talks in Rome this weekend could also be complicated by the Easter holiday. The dispute comes as President Trump expressed on Monday regarding the speed of the talks, accusing Tehran of tapping the US along. A second US aircraft carrier is now operating in Mideast waters ahead of the talks, as Trump insists Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons and has threatened military action if talks fail. On the other side, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei believes the talks are worth pursuing. However, he also said Iran does not fully trust the US, adding the phrase, "We know who we are dealing with." Meanwhile, the UN's nuclear chief plans to visit Iran this week, possibly over inspector access.
Former Peruvian President Ollanta Humala and his wife Nadine Heredia have been sentenced to 15 years in prison for using laundered funds from a Brazilian construction company to finance Humala's political campaigns.
Al señor Ollanta o Moisés Humalatazo la pena de 15 años de pena privativa de libertad efectiva, la misma que debe ser ejecutada de manera provisional de conformidad al artículo 402.2 del Código Procesal Penal.
The pair were found to have received millions of dollars of illegal contributions from construction company Odebrecht and from the government of former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. The ruling makes Humala the third former Peruvian president imprisoned for corruption in the last 2 decades. Their trial began in 2022 and the couple were convicted alongside 8 others.
The US government has frozen over $2 billion in funding for Harvard University. It follows Harvard's refusal to meet Trump administration demands to curb campus activism. This is the 7th time the government has withheld funds from a major university, most of them being Ivy League schools, pressuring them to comply with its political agenda. Demands include governance reforms, changes to admission policies, auditing views of diversity on campus, and not recognizing certain student groups. To support its view, the administration has cited concerns over anti-Semitism during last year's pro-Palestine protests on university campuses. But Harvard President Alan Garber has rejected its demands and said the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. The government announced the funding freeze shortly afterwards. Meanwhile, Washington has launched investigations and detained and deported a number of foreign students in relation to pro-Palestinian protests.
This year, American consumers with a taste for Easter eggs and Belgian chocolates are likely to face a hefty bill. In addition to the pre-existing 6% US tariffs on Belgian chocolate, the treats will be subject to a 10% surtax, like most products imported into the US.
Les taxes qui seront d'application vont augmenter le prix pour les consommateurs américains. Je pense qu'ils achèteront environ autant. C'est très difficile de savoir, évidemment, parce que, n'oublions pas, il y a en plus le dollar qui a baissé de 10%.
Caught in the US president's ever-changing stance on tariffs, the Belgian chocolatier is unsure where he stands. Originally, he had planned to send a shipment to the United States to beat the surtaxes, but the idea was scrapped when Trump announced a suspension of the tariffs.
Pour nous, ce qui est difficile, c'est l'incertitude, parce qu'il va y avoir des discussions pendant les 90 jours, c'est à ça qu'ils servent, mais on ne sait pas à quoi on va atterrir. Si c'est des taxes très importantes, ça pourrait faire réduire les commandes de nos produits par nos clients. Et là, si j'ai commencé la production, j'ai acheté les emballages, je serais très ennuyé.
This chocolate factory exports a quarter of its production to the United States. It's found the hopes the EU will protect Belgian chocolate from reciprocal tariffs.
Il n'y a pas de droit sur le chocolat américain en Europe, donc moi j'ai l'impression que si on a travaillé par secteur, le chocolat ne devrait pas être impliqué.
He does not rule out reducing his dependence on the American market by increasing his sales in Germany, England or Austria. Prices have also risen for Europeans as a result of soaring cocoa prices caused by climatic disruptions.